democracy. But is our media actually enjoying the freedom of speech and expression? Is our media credible in today's time? I fear that a day is not far when people will not have faith in the media. Hello and welcome to Essence News. I'm Ujjwal Agarwal, and today Essence feels honored to welcome none other than Mrs. Haider on our exclusive show of the interview. Thank you so much, ma'am, for this interview. So, ma'am, let me start by asking you, do you think that the credibility of the media is at an all-time stake?
Well, let's put it this way. The fact is that the media has always been seen as a part of society. Whether you call it mainstream media today, whether you call it social media today, the fact is journalists are those who are stepping a little bit on the side and trying to decode what is happening in society. Now, when it comes to whether media credibility is at stake, I think we have to look at what are the reasons behind that credibility being called into question. One part of it definitely lies with the media, where you have people who would prefer to portray opinion as fact, and therefore have over time created a situation where, because they are much more visible and vocal in what they're saying, they tend to represent the media, but they're not actually the media. I mean, most of the media, practically, I would say a large part of the media, are basically people who are putting together news, putting together facts, and presenting them for people. So one problem has come from within the media. There is another problem, and that is the problem from those who would like to make the media less credible, because they want to put their message out to people in an unfiltered way. I mean, basically political parties, and this is not just in India, but we see it around the world, where politicians and leaders of countries actually try to make the case that the media is not credible, so therefore they should be heard directly. This is actually where I think the larger danger for the media comes from today.
Ma'am, do you think that media is facing the major problem of corporatization in today's time?
Well, somebody has to own the media. Journalists cannot themselves afford to put out stories and to go and gather the news as they ought to on their own. And I know that you run a very credible operation. It means that you have to put in resources. You cannot just do it on your own. So somebody will always own the media. The question is twofold. One, are those who are setting up the media outfit, whether it's a newspaper, whether it's a website, whether it's a television channel, are they essentially driven by public service? Because I think there is a real danger from the idea that the media must be some kind of a profit center. I can understand that the media has to break even, or nobody will want to put money into it. But I think the idea that it should be squeezed in order to make profits out of it is actually abhorrent and goes against the idea of the media as public service to society. So the first part to ask is not, the problem for me is not who owns the media. The problem for me is, first, is the agenda one of profit over public service, in which case there is a problem. And the second part is, are you also then willing to allow your media to be manipulated for other things? So it's not just profit, but influence, good relations with someone who's influential or is in power, good relations with other corporates. Are you open to that as well? So I don't think the ownership is an issue. The media will be owned by somebody or the other. Some people are lucky that they are owned by trusts, and trusts come together to put money
Ma'am, but
into it.
don't you
But
think that since political parties are investing into news channels, in fact, they're opening their own regional news channels, especially in the southern states of our country, don't you think that they'll be the one which will be supportive towards their political party rather than being transparent?
look, I think so long as you have a certain amount of honesty, you can go forward regardless of who the owner is. Because if you are able to say, I'm owned by so and so, so there is a crisis of media. You see, the point I keep wanting to make is, everybody wants to break the media up. They want to say, this is print media, this is television, this is online.
Online.
This is social media, this is mainstream media. Always a fight setting up different channels against each other, always a fight setting up different models of ownership against each other. I think we have to go back to say, The problem has to be seen at the source. Is the journalism ethical? Is the journalism above board? Is the journalism following principles of public service? Then you can work backwards and decide which one is is a viable and which one is actually a credible journalistic enterprise and which one is not. But I think by constantly trying to find the extraneous parts of it, is this person related to so and so? Is that person, does that person originally have a political affiliation? Those will not be an issue so long as there's complete, clear transparency. That when there is a conflict of interest, the journalist makes it very clear there is a conflict of interest and actually recuses themselves from a story. I think those are the things we should push much more for, regardless of what kind of media we have. We have to start pushing for much better journalism rather than saying that my problem is the color of the money, the essentially where the person is coming from, what the person is related to, and all the rest.
Ma'am, you spoke about public services and profits. Now, speaking about that, the main objective of the media is to disseminate news. But to some extent, it also needs to earn TRP, to earn profits, to run the organization. So, how do you think that the TRP objective as well as the main objective of the media go hand in hand?
I've never believed the bogey of TRPs and circulation numbers, because to begin with, when you speak about TRPs, what are they based on? They are based on the maximum, I think, ratings agency will have, what, 100,000 set-top boxes? I don't even think there is an agency that has that many. Maximum they have is about 25, 30,000. Are you telling me that the viewer of India, a country of 1.3 billion, is being decided on the basis of this minuscule set-top box figure? I don't believe it. Secondly, I don't believe that TRP agencies that are run by the government are essentially going to always be unbiased and have no political agenda there. So I think that this is a bogey that is used. Secondly, I don't believe, and you're asking me for my personal opinion, none of this represents what my newspaper thinks,
Right.
or what might be right. There may be others who have a different view of where journalism should go. But my belief is that journalists are entrusted by society to tell them what is important, to tell them what is the news. If I abandon the idea of what is important for society and instead talk about what is it you want to see, then I'm just walking into a trap. I'm not going to do what you want me to do. If you want to watch entertainment, if you want to watch two people punching each other, by all means do that. Just don't call it journalism.
But nowadays, on the television media, each and every channel just showcases calling up a Hindu, calling up a Muslim, creating tussles between them, calling an Indian, calling a Pakistani, creating tussles. We know we have entertainment channels for this, but why is it that a news is running behind entertainment?
Well, I think they're making a mistake, and I think that's bad journalism. I think to begin with, this idea that we have to constantly try and find balance. Is there a balance between good and evil? Would we, if we were thinking just theoretically, say, let's put one good and one evil on the table and let people decide what they should choose?
No.
So my point is that we create these ideas because actually we're hiding behind the basic thing, and that is bad journalism. As far as I'm concerned, journalism in its own sense is a pure thing, and you know what it is. It's not some relative idea that people don't understand. And I think that's what people should focus on rather than trying to find justification for doing what is essentially the exigent thing to do, or what someone else told you to do, or what worse, what someone else is doing. So because somebody else is doing it, therefore I must do it too, is the worst way to do journalism.
Ma'am, we know that if journalists disseminate true news, they've been killed, they've been threatened by political parties. Now, if they disseminate false news, if they disseminate fake news, then we say that they are biased. Then how do you justify this? Where do the journalists go?
Well, I think journalists do understand what the dangers are in what they're doing. And if you become a journalist only because you want to be safe, then choose a very, very easy beat, as all I would say. Because there are dangers. Why is it worth it to do? And I think we should focus on that. We should focus on why people would want to become journalists. Because there is a desire to tell people what you think is the news. There is a desire to educate society, to enlighten society, to also make sure that what they get is the unvarnished truth. So the truth from the ground. And if these are not desires for you, then what you're doing over there is always going to be suspect. Now, you're saying to me that journalists who work in favor of one political figure or a power center or another, my point is, why should a journalist ever have to do that? You should be in the position where, regardless of the person in front of you and regardless of what your personal equation may be, you may hate their politics, you have to give them a fair chance, or you have to make sure that you follow your ethics of journalism with them. And if you do that, then you go to sleep easy. And I always say that the biggest sort of reward, if you ask me, in journalism is not that you're going to get a huge fat bonus check, or that you are one of the nice things is that you get to travel the world, but that's certainly not a reward. It's hard work. Exactly. The real reward is that you sleep at night with your conscience clean and with a feeling that you are part of a society that you have tried to better.
Ma'am, speaking to you about the democracy of media, don't you think that the current issue that has taken place in EBP News showcases that the democracy of media is at stake? The democracy of media is in threat.
I certainly think that the ABP case is one of real concern. Nobody has come out honestly, except I think Punya Prasan Bajpai himself put a blog out saying what had happened to him. And we don't know exactly who pulled the strings and who made the calls. But you have a fairly straight case of someone who went out there and did a fact check on what the government was saying, on what the prime minister was saying on his own show. And that person no longer reads the news. He's not the only case. If you look around channels, there are people who have just disappeared from air, who are not being given space, who were visibly vocally making the government accountable or taking them on. I think that is something to worry. But I think there is a positive, and that is the kind of outcry we've seen. The fact that it's not just journalists who are complaining about this, it is society that is worrying about it. I think that's an extremely positive thing, and I think the fact is we have to keep fighting. It doesn't really matter eventually what government there is. It's a bit of a a slippery slope as far as I can see, because each government comes and tries to actually make it more difficult for the press to get access, make it more hard for a journalist to actually do their job. But that's where our challenge lies.
Ma'am, getting into a little bit of politics, ma'am, we all know that Imran Khan has been elected as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. How far do you think will be the diplomatic relations between India and Pakistan after Imran Khan being elected as a Prime Minister?
Well, I think it is hard to say, because think about it. We are now entering the sixth or seventh year where India and Pakistan have had no bilateral dialogue. So we already are coming up against an extremely long period of no real bilateral dialogue. The only kind of talks leaders have held, or ministers or secretaries have held, has been essentially about how to restart talks, but they have not actually restarted them. So you're up against a pretty big mountain there, an uphill challenge. The second thing I will say, looking back, is that no prime minister in India and no prime minister in Pakistan has come to power without at least attempting once to give it a go, to try and see if they can restart the dialogue process. And we saw with Prime Minister Modi, he did it as well. He went to Lahore. He said something very important over there, which has not been followed up since then, where he said there will be people who will try to derail the process of talks, and we have to ensure that the talks go on regardless of what tries to derail them. And the fact is that we've seen that pattern again and again. So again, if you look at history, it's hard to see how Mr. Imran Khan will succeed where others have failed. However, my belief is that if there is political will, and that political will has to be both sides, there's no point in being political will just in Pakistan and not in India, then it is possible to go much further than we can imagine. After all, now we hear that the Vajpayee Musharraf regimes and the Musharraf Manmohan Singh regimes actually came close to an agreement on Kashmir. They actually came close to even a peace treaty between the two countries. That didn't go further. But this was just in the last decade. So we know that things are possible if there is a consistency, if there is a political will on both sides. I do think that in India, upcoming elections will be an issue. Perhaps it's only after elections that we can really see what engaging Mr. Imran Khan is about, because maybe they don't, put their resources out there either. And the third part to this, I will say, is that it's something Mr. Imran Khan has said himself, which is that perhaps no other Pakistani politician has engaged as much with India as
As
Imran
Imran
Khan
Khan has
has.
been.
Of course, he did it in a different role, but he certainly, even as a politician, he has visited India, he has spoken over here, he has spoken often about people's movements, and he has an understanding. He's originally from India as well, I think, but he has an understanding, as in, I think some part of his family is from India. But he has an understanding of the concerns over here. Now, whether he wants to make good on them or not is the first part, and whether the timing suits the both.
Ma'am, how would you compare the Indian media with the Western media?
In what way?
Like in terms of the destination of news, in terms of the credibility, and in terms of the political influence on them.
Well, I think Indian journalism is quite as old as journalism in most parts of the world, and is well respected. If you're talking just particularly about television journalism, then it's a little more, it's a newer industry over here. But I think there are a lot of similarities. In fact, much more than most people want to uh, uh, compare one unfavorably to the other. But my sense is that journalists around the world have a very strong bond. They're up against very similar challenges in today's date when you look at social media, when you look at the way Twitter is used by political parties. So I honestly think that journalism in the US has a lot to learn from India. Journalism in India has a lot to learn from the US. I think the kind of journalists we have in India who go out there on the ground in tough terrain and work, really in difficult situations with a lot of risks, are extremely credible. So I'm not sure in what way you want me to compare them.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this interview. So we had Mrs. Suhasini Haider with us today. We'll be back with the next exclusive interview very soon. So please stay tuned only on Essence News. Thank you.